I do feel, and I think it would be the same for ethnicity and other dimensions of diversity, when you create a space where people have more shared experiences, so in this case, women, but I think it could apply for other things, when you create those spaces where you don't have to mask your behavior, you don't have to worry about how am I showing up, you don't have to worry about what's going on in your body that day, because women's bodies do some interesting things. You can just be yourself. It just creates a better environment for learning and sharing and connection, and that's really all that we're trying to achieve through some of these programs.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the All Inclusive podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by Jo Portlock, VP of Diversity, Inclusion and Belonging at LexisNexis Risk Solutions. We discussed how corporate networks can either support or hinder the advancement of female leadership. And Jo shared insightful strategies that have successfully increased female representation in senior roles at LexisNexis. We also dove into the importance of fostering connections and opportunities within the workplace to create an environment where diversity can thrive. As always, before jumping into the video, make sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on your notification bell, and follow on your favourite podcast platform so that you never miss an episode. That being said, let's jump in. Hi, Jo.
Hi, Natasha. How are you doing?
Great, thanks. Welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you for letting me be here.
So let's kick things off. Tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself and your journey to DEI leadership.
Yeah, so and apologies, I am at the tail end of a cold. So I've been working. So my name is Jo Portlock. I should probably start off with that. I'm the VP of Diversity, Inclusion and Belonging, which is quite a long title. My role is broadly working in diversity inclusion, but I also oversee early careers, sustainability, volunteering, CSR, and wellbeing. So it's quite a broad remit. And I work for a company called LexisNexis Risk Solutions, which you've probably never heard of. However, in a non-weird way, we possibly have data on you because we work very much in fraud, security, identity, financial services, insurance markets. So we're kind of making sure that data is used for good. And as some people say, it's stopping the bad guys. And I've worked for that company for about 10 years and the last 5 in D&I. So in terms of my journey into D&I work, it was sort of by accident and yet something now I'm really grateful for. So I've mainly worked sort of 20 years prior to this in HR in quite a sort of obvious generalist trajectory, business partnering, in various businesses and globally. And I got cornered one day by somebody in the business, and they said, "What do we do around gender inclusion? We don't seem to do anything." And there's this thing called the gender pay gap coming in legislation in the UK. And I sort of said, "Oh, I don't know. I don't think we do anything. Let me ask my boss," who at the time was nearing retirement, white male Scottish guy who kind of looked a little bit scared by my question and just said, "Well, I don't know, but the optics of it are not great if I lead it, so you'll have to lead it." So one of those scenarios where you sort of ask a question and end up with a project. And that's kind of how I got started in D&I on top of the day job. And then very fortunately, back in late 2018, I got offered the opportunity to run this as a team of one person, i.e. me, and a blank sheet of paper and do it as a full-time job for the same company.
Oh, wow. It's definitely a compelling story there and journey you've got. I would love to hear, what was that moment or experience that you had which kind of really cemented, yes, this is the job for me. I couldn't imagine doing anything else.
Yeah, so I think it's just a job you always have to learn in. You can't get bored in this work, and you always have to adapt and learn through how you work with people, how you influence, how people. I find it a very enriching job because you're always learning from other people's experiences, and you're always learning more and more, and things are always changing in this space. So it's never work that's going to be static and stay the same, and you're going to do the same things every single year. So for me personally, very engaging, very interesting, just by the nature of how it changes. And it's a job where I don't really feel anybody's getting it perfect, right? So you've always got to keep learning, challenging yourself, and that gives you a lot of permission. And you can obviously the rewards you get in the role, the impact you make are just so significant. So I always feel like that. I think in terms of how I work, but I'm one person, right? Somebody would do my job very differently. But what I lean into, which is strength for me, is I love data. I'm a geek. And it is a job where you can really get really involved in data, really look at cause and effect. My academic background is psychology, so that plays really well into D&I because so much we think we're the most rational, fair, judgment-free human beings ever, and we are the exact opposite. So it really leans into my sort of curiosity and understanding about the impact of bias, groupthink, how we're easily influenced by what we see, what we hear, how others lead and behave. So it sort of naturally really sort of works, something I'm very curious and interested in.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to hear. Could you share like an experience that you've had where your own personal experience has impacted the way in which you've approached a particular initiative or program?
Yeah, I think with D&I work, so I could sort of list off that I'm a woman, I'm neurodiverse, I live with a long-term health condition, I'm a mother, all those sort of personal journeys that have both helped me learn about my privilege, um, but also about barriers. Some are visible, some are not visible, some I was not aware of, like becoming a mother. There are barriers that I heard about, but I was like, that's not a thing. And it's a thing. Um, Although equally, I do also feel that sometimes D&I work can lean a bit too more into the diverse and the people with these experiences, and therefore implies there are people if you don't have those experiences, and there are many experiences and lived experiences I don't have, that it's for some and not everybody. So I sort of I lean into it. Of course, it personally motivates me. I do want to see better inclusion for all, and the next generation not to experience some of the things you experience. But equally, that work is for everybody, and that's the real tough part of D&I, that if you haven't experienced those things, then how do you explain it to people? How do you explain that it's real? And I feel that the people who work best in this space just have to be open to everything, that everybody knows something you don't. And so not to be kind of so just in your work and your experience, but be open to everybody's.
I mean, that's what we're trying to do here, right? We're trying to make sure that when you enter a room, you don't feel like you're the only one in that sense. You feel that there's some camaraderie. Your views, your opinions will be heard and respected. And as leaders that are trying to make that change, you can't simply just solely focus on what your views and what your perspectives on how we do that um should be. It's going
Mm.
to take everyone's individual experiences and how their feelings, their opinions, their perspectives in order to be able to try and change and get to the culture that we're wanting to see. Reflecting on your time in DEI, you've been there for a number of years now. What would you say has been like your proudest moment?
So I will go to two two different ends of the spectrum, let's say. So there was a data geek. So seeing data and seeing change, because it's such an influencer with CEOs in particular. I think 85% of CEOs have either been a CFO or COO at some point. So we kind of know data's like language that they're very engaged in, and you can show progress. So when I look at my time in the role, I'm really pleased. I'm most pleased around we've seen a true movement in gender representation and ethnicity representation at VP, so our top levels of leadership. So and I'm a big believer, you start changing that in the right way and it will trickle down, it will influence culture, it does give voice to different people's perspectives. If you see that representation, people lean in. So whilst we've seen movement in other metrics, I really believe in leadership metrics, and leadership representation does have just a big influence overall on culture. So there's huge pride I think we can take in that, and we've moved women. Please bear in context that we are a technology business, so gender representation is not easy in that sort of business. But we've moved women at VP from 19% to just under 30%, and ethnicity from 16% to just under 23%. So that they're pretty big shifts in leadership that we've seen. But there is the complete other side, where just the small things that people say to me, like, I'm a carer for a child, and I would have never shared that at work, or I have a neurodiversity or a disability I feel I can now talk about at work, or this is the first workplace I've ever been to where we've talked about LGBT inclusion, and it's helped me understand how I can talk about that at work. So all those small little stories or pieces of feedback people give, which really give you that humility around, actually this has affected somebody's life, and it's not a graph, and it's not a data point, and it's not something that's positively moving upwards, but that's real for that person, and that's made such a difference, and it's unique to their working experience wherever they are in their career. It's just so humbling to hear it, and it's just, I just get so much pride, probably more so in that, when you hear those points of view and the impact this work has.
Yeah, that must feel really great. And just to kind of circle back into the metrics and the data, fantastic. Congratulations on that improvement there. They're both two really important areas, I think, is women trying to move up in the workplace into more senior leadership positions. It can be difficult, especially in tech. So I think I'm going to have to ask the burning question that everybody's got on their mind. How did you do it? How did you do it?
And yeah, I mean, obviously it isn't just me. I never like to think of the work as me. I'm just here to, somebody once gave me great counsel when I was having one of my D&I moments of, what am I doing? Can I keep going? It's about elevating choices and giving people more options. So I always try and keep grounded to that when we have our difficult days in D&I. I think in terms of how you do it, of course, there is not one thing. If there is, we would be bottling it up and selling it. I think firstly, we launched a program, but we were very clear on the contracting of that program for senior women, because they all said, I do not want to be a woman on a leadership program for women, and don't try and fix me. So we created a program that was more around elevating connections and opportunities. Sponsorship was a big piece, that a lot of women felt that sponsorship happens naturally in the culture, but it doesn't serve women, both in terms of the opportunity and the spaces where sponsorship happens, typically outside of work. Typically women felt they had less time to give to those. So we created some sponsorship connections, really with the view of just know your talent better. We are a busy business. We spend a lot of time talking about to-do lists and actions, but we don't spend a lot of time connecting with people and understanding them better. And through that, what we noticed happening is actually leaders knew their talent better, and they probably had some misperceptions, and that enabled them to think about succession and people they hadn't originally had on their succession plans. And equally, it worked the other way around. I had one female leader in particular said, I could have never have seen myself working for that individual because I didn't know them, and now I know them through that program, and that enabled me to have the confidence to feel I could do that job and I could sit around their table. So that was a big part of it, and really thinking about how do we coach women through a typical bias that sadly we do experience. I'm sure most people do, that sort of aggression bias, or just sort of being quiet and getting on with it. And actually, there is the other way that we can do it, which is leading through empathy and leadership choices and our individuality of leadership. And really, a lot of women feel that they missed that through just trying to sort of navigate a culture that wasn't working for them. And whilst, of course, I'm not, an advocate for women only programs, I do feel, and I think it would be the same for ethnicity and other dimensions of diversity, when you create a space where people have more shared experiences, so in this case, women, but I think it could apply for other things, when you create those spaces where you don't have to mask your behavior. You don't have to worry about how am I showing up. You don't have to worry about what's going on in your body that day, because women's bodies do some interesting things. You can just be yourself. It just creates a better environment for learning and sharing and connection. And that's really all that we're trying to achieve through some of these programs. We're not sort of giving people secret skills that they wish they knew 20 years ago. So that's been a big influencer. And as I said, I really believe in the power of representation sort of having an impact wider down. I mean, I can literally see that in our own data. We appointed an amazing female leader to our head of sales, our biggest head of sales role. And ever since that appointment, the representation of women in that team and the ethnicity balance has improved as well, has gone from 33% to nearly 50-50. She's a great manager, right? So that's the first thing.
Yeah.
But I believe and I hear that people lean in. They see her in that leadership role, and that signals it's a space where other people would like to be.
Yeah, definitely. I think representation matters so much. And I
Mm.
love that the example that you've given, I feel that it showcases the importance of language, the way in which you communicate these programs is important, and just opening the door and providing opportunity and connection goes a long way than simply kind of just having a luncheon for women, right? And having a
Yeah.
few people come and speak. I
Mhm.
mean, that's great. It's great to see some and bring some awareness, but it does sound like you guys went the extra mile and really intentionally thought about how are we going to increase our numbers on this, which is fantastic. Did you face any unexpected challenges?
Around the gender aspect or other, just in all of this work?
I Do you know what? I think, yeah, let's go broad. In all of this work, what's been, I want to say, two challenges which you were like,
Yeah.
wow, okay, I didn't really see that one coming.
Yeah, I mean, I think, D&I people are not saints either, right? And we're fallible and we've got our own biases and our own experiences, right? So I'm from London. Our big office in the USA is in Atlanta. I can tell you I had zero clue about what life in Atlanta is like, particularly through the lens of race, particularly through the lens of being a Black person in that part of the USA, because the USA is so different in of itself. So, my own experience of travel in the USA had probably been to places like New York and California. That's completely different to other parts of the USA like Georgia. So, yes, I had a real moment actually where I met with our African Ancestry Network there, and I thought, oh, this will be fine. I'm from the UK, I'm from London, probably a massive bias or preconception, London's so diverse, I've got this. And then really kind of heard about experiences that just, were just things I would just never even remotely think about. Um, so, but I feel like anybody in D&I, it's a good thing you learn from that, right? And it is about understanding different perspectives. And as I said, there'd be an irony if I said, well, here's the one way we're going to do it, and that's going to fit geographically for every single individual, for every single characteristic. It's fine. There's one way to do it. So what I've learned is you listen and you contract and you check in and you say, okay, so this is what I'm hearing. What would be solutions, and how can I make those solutions come into play? You don't have to know everything. In fact, it's impossible. And don't experience the burden. Where you will serve the work better is just being open, listening, kind of the saying of nothing about me without me. really lean into that, and that's fine. Everybody can do well in the role if you've got that open mind and you're here to listen and learn as much as anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, LexisNexis Risk Solution is a global organization, so I can only imagine that like you're going to that there is always going to be a challenge of making sure that any initiative and program that you put in place is effective throughout the whole of the organization. But in order to do that, it can't look the same everywhere because there's going to be
Yeah.
cultural nuances in different places in the world. Um, so it's great that I guess you got a dose of that quite early on in your journey in going to the
Yeah.
US.
Yeah.
But it's good to hear the reflection that you've learned from that experience, and now your approach you've adapted your approach. What would you say has been quite effective? Have you lent on your colleagues that are based within that particular region to help you when you're creating these variety of different initiatives?
Yeah, so I'd say ERGs are just for anybody who's got ERGs in their business, they are invaluable, and just always lean on them to be a voice and a conscience. As I said right back in the beginning, when I started this job, I was one person. So it's quite hard for one person to know and represent everything. Whereas now I'm very fortunate, I have a team, so I have better geographical representation and perspectives to really kind of bolster up kind of different lived experiences that enrich this work. So I feel it's helped through just having a bigger team and representation in the USA in particular, because that's our business is about 60% US, about 20% UK, and sort of 20% rest of the world. So we are global in our geographies, but we're predominant in those two locations. So that's really helped. But of course, it's about involving everybody and giving them voice and to help shape this work. So ERGs in particular are an amazing asset to give you that perspective globally around what this means. But like all good leaders, you've got to create the space for them to share and be inclusive and ask those questions.
Mm. So the second challenge that you weren't expecting with this work, what would that be?
Oh, I think I probably speak for a lot of D&I people. It's hard. It's emotional labor. It's a huge responsibility that I never quite realized you're signing up to. Um, if you care about the work, and I rarely meet a D&I professional who doesn't care about the work, um, you really want to make a change, and then you have to come up against this. Change is hard, change is slow. It's not always going one way. Anything that affects diversity and inclusion is so multifaceted. We talked about representation, that has a huge impact. And it can sort of, trickle down into retention, career, well-being, psychological safety, inclusion. It impacts so much. But sadly, the reverse can unpick very quickly. So if we took 2020, the murder of George Floyd, we probably had about two or three quite senior Black individuals leave the business. So from a numbers perspective, it's not massively going to change any percentages, but the optics and the impact was huge, and you saw a real trickle down, a real impact of the engagement around our AAN ERG in particular, but others as well. So you are always navigating kind of how should I say it, like a good wave sometimes, and then you're like, this is working, this is working, this is great, and then you should always prepare that something can happen, and it's not one thing that's going to slightly unravel. So you've always got to be sort of looking at those checks and balances, and seeing what's having an impact, and what do we need to be thinking about, what's coming next, and what can we keep evolving in this work.
Great. And I mean, that then leads on to my next question, which is about looking to the future of DEI. What trends do you see coming on the horizon?
Gosh, so do we want to predict the future? 2020s have not been the best decade for predicting things, have they? Um, so having a lot of calls about legislation, and obviously the states will have an interesting election. The UK is going to have a general election this year. I think legislation wise, there's going to be more requirements for companies to look at pay, to report on pay gaps. We've literally just published our pay gap in Australia, very similar to the UK. I really hope ethnicity pay gap reporting is coming to the UK in the next year or so. I appreciate gender pay gap is not a perfect stat, but my view is it promoted a lot of conversation and it held people to account. So I know it's not measuring exactly what people thought it was measuring, but it's starting conversation. And for me, even an imperfect stat that starts conversation is good.
Hmm.
So I can see lots more legislation changes, particularly in the UK, EU, probably in the USA and in other parts of APAC as well. I think there's a very interesting dynamic when we look generationally. And in our business now, 20% of our hires are Gen Z. So we know they're demographically more diverse. We know they put more value on diversity and inclusion. Um, and we know they have a different psychological contract with companies around what is loyalty to a company for them. And I think that just means we have to work harder on inclusion, that sense of connection, belonging, and really create spaces where people want to be. And see that whole psychological contract as different, not bad, just different. I think if we also look to future, I can see a world where we integrate well-being and D&I a lot more. Um, we know, as I mentioned with Gen Z, nearly a quarter of Gen Z people have already experienced some form of mental health situation. So I think we'll have to be more supportive of that in the future. We know menopausal women are the biggest growing demographic in the workplace, and yet 90% of companies don't offer any support. So for me, menopause support is gender support, is D&I. So I can see companies doing a lot more around that. But also the bigger thing, I'm very passionate about the well-being angle of D&I because it's not talked about enough. If you experience exclusion, your body, your brain interprets it like pain. If you experience microaggressions, it's the same impact. It creates mental fatigue because it's hard to call out, it's hard to recognize, therefore, it's hard for allies to know what to do. But it's a real impact. It is that sort of death by a thousand cuts that can really drain people mentally. So I would love to see more conversations around well-being and D&I because it's just so important. Unfortunately, there's not always data points around these things, but I really feel that that's where this work has another impact and can make a real difference.
So, what would you say? How can leaders prepare for these
Mm.
upcoming challenges?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because I find sometimes leaders, they want a thing to do, right? They're like, "Give me a
Yeah.
task." And I'm
Hmm.
like, "It's not a task.
It's
I'm
not come up
sorry. I'd
yet.
love to say
Yeah.
I'd love to say, do this thing and we're good." So I really feel with leaders, firstly, just be curious, show up, make the time for it. I know a lot of leaders are very busy people, but this is about knowing people better. It's about responding empathetically, learning, being open, being curious. And actually, sometimes as a leader, that makes far more difference than just saying, do it. Here's a thing to do. So I would say for leaders, just firstly, always be open, listen to your people, particularly around things like the newer generations coming into the workplace. These are not necessarily the people who get time with leaders because they're earlier in their career. So always be finding out what's going on in your business and be curious to that because what you have the privilege of hearing if you're in a leadership position might not be the reality of what's going on every single day in your organization. Um, and I don't expect anybody to know everything about everything. I mean, like I've been doing this work 5 years and I'm learning every single day. Um, but I would encourage people to respond thoughtfully and openly. Just because you haven't experienced a barrier, just because it's not visible, it doesn't mean it's not there and it's not hurting your business and your people. So always be sort of open to learning more about this space.
Oh, well, Joe, thank you so much. That's some great advice you've got there. Um, Just before you do leave us, I want to circle a little bit further into something that you said at the beginning of our conversation, where when you started into this role, you were a team of one. You now have,
Yes.
you've now grown that to having many more people beside you and helping you in this mission. How did you do it? Like, how did you go from just being yourself to then being able to have a team? Like, what, because I know there's a lot of leaders out there that are doing this on their own, and it
Yeah.
can be a struggle to get extra support and assistance. So what did you find was an effective strategy to gain that buy-in from your senior exec team to have more people?
Yeah. So number one, I couldn't ask for a better CEO in terms of their advocacy and support. You really do need that. I think you've got to make the business case for this work, which can be a bit frustrating because you sort of feel like, oh, it's so obvious. But sometimes I've learned it's obvious. It's obvious to me, or probably yourself and many other people, but it's not obvious to everybody. So the business case with data and numbers, I think, always helps. I sometimes lean into the legislative changes, the new generations, the fact that our customers are global, our customers are asking us for this information. So there's everything that suggests that this is going to be more and more important. Um, and I think personally, I just came to that point where I just said, well, so I'm one person. I could probably deliver three things really well, but there's about 25 things on my list. And then the next year, there's about 50 things on my list. So I just kind of said, like, if you want this work to be this, then that's fine. Then one person could probably do this. If you want this work to be this, which I really feel it should be, then I'm going to need more support. I'm going to need more people to pick up this work. And then, really, in my mind, where I'm ultimately moving it to is a team of the 10,000 employees we've got, because everybody's part of this work, and that's not always easy to explain, but every single day, every single person in our company has made a choice around inclusion. Um, it's not opt-in, it works alongside everything. And again, I feel like that's part of the story we're trying to tell. And we've even slightly seen it in our numbers. If you when I talked about the representation of leadership, we've really impacted that. We haven't impacted representation at line manager level because I feel we've probably influenced at the senior level what those senior leaders can influence. The next step is, how do we get all our line managers doing this work and making good choices around inclusion? And then we would see our numbers hopefully improve sort of further down the business as well.
Oh, well, fantastic, Joe. Thank you so much for joining me here on the show. You've shared some incredible insights, and I think they're going to be amazing and so valuable to our listeners. For those that are listening, how can they best connect with you?
Oh, so it's really important. D&I is hard work. The emotional labor in this work is so great, and it's so I really feel it's not recognized. So I absolutely believe in supporting anybody in the D&I space, even if it's I don't know, a session where we talk less positively, where we share our frustrations, where we share our expertise. So I'm very open to anybody connecting with me, sorry, on LinkedIn. Jo Portlock. I think I'm the only Jo Portlock out there. So please just connect with me on LinkedIn's the best way to find me. But I'm always happy to talk to anybody in this space, because we're all trying to do the same thing, and it benefits everybody when we move the dial on this.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, thanks so much again, Joe, for joining me today. And I wish you all the best in the future.
Oh, thank you for having me.